Welcome to Crimson Clues, where shadows hide secrets and silence reveals the truth. Every story is a puzzle, and every clue takes you closer to the answer. Subscribe now, join the hunt, and let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. The Carol Song. The snow dropped gently over St. Mary's, creating a quiet that appeared to cradle the glow of Christmas lights strung along the houses. Miss Jane Marple sat at the window of her nephew Raymond's parlor, her knitting needles clicking softly and her gaze fixated on the landscape outside. The town square was filled with expectancy. Children ran around, their laughter mixed with the aroma of mulled wine from a nearby stall. Tonight, the St. Mary Me Carollers, known for their eerie harmonies, were scheduled to deliver their annual Christmas Eve presentation. "They make a nice sound, don't they, Aunt Jane?" Raymond spoke while pouring tea from a chipped china kettle. The Carollers. Miss Marple's lips curved into a small grin when she realized that half of the hamlet had turned out to hear them. Her attention never left the window. Voices, Raymond, are fascinating things. They transport joy, grief, and secrets, often all at once. Her tone was light, yet her eyes, as piercing as ever, appeared to see through the snowflakes. The clock struck 7, and a silence fell over the square as the Carollers gathered beneath the venerable tree, their lanterns throwing golden pools in the snow. There were 8 of them, dressed in crimson and green, their faces flushed from the cold. Mr. Reginald Thorne. The choir's director took a step forward, raising his baton as if summoning a storm. Miss Marple saw his tight posture and the way his eyes flew about the group, as if he were counting reasons rather than singers. The first notes of "O Come All the Faithful" rose into the night, pure and crystalline. The soprano soaring, the basses grounding the tune. The lead soprano, Clara Beaumont, sang with zeal that bordered on theatrical, her voice cutting through the cold. But Henry Voss, the tenor, piqued Miss Marple's interest. His powerful, resonant voice exuded a comforting warmth that appeared to envelop the audience until it faltered. A single jagged note shattered the harmony like a crack in ice. Henry's palm rushed to his throat, his eyes wide with utter amazement. The Carollers stumbled, their voices fraying as Henry staggered forward, his lamp dropping from his grip. It smashed against the cobblestones. The flames died out amid the snow. He was silent as the last echoes of the carol faded into the night. Gasps echoed throughout the crowd. Raymond jumped to his feet, spilling tea on the table. "Good gods, Aunt Jane, he'll stay here, Raymond," Miss Marple remarked gently, rising with her shawl slung over her shoulders. She went with astonishing speed for a woman her age, her thoughts racing faster than her steps. By the time she arrived to the square, a small crowd had formed around Henry's body. Dr. Haddock, the local physician, knelt alongside him, his fingers pressing against Henry's wrist. His expression was stern as he looked up. "He's gone," he explained quietly. "Dead," Clara Beaumont sobbed, holding her scarf. "Oh, Henry, how dreadful." Miss Marple's gaze shifted to her, noticing how her tears appeared to pause for effect. Mr. Thorne, still gripping his baton, yelled, "Step back, everyone. Give this man some dignity." Miss Marple couldn't determine whether his voice was trembling due to grief or nerves. She knelt beside Dr. Haddock, her gaze studying Henry's face. He was pale and almost serene, with only a faint bluish tinge around his lips. A minor element drew her attention. A slight, delicious smell of almonds lingered in the air around his mouth. She did not say anything, but her mind filed the observation away like a stitch in her knitting. "Heart failure, perhaps," a villager said quietly. "Or the cold," another said. "It's bitter tonight." Miss Marple stood there, her expression unreadable. Her voice cut off in mid-song. She mumbled almost to herself, "How very deliberate." Miss Marple waited as the gathering thinned, led out by Constable Reed. Her eyes swept the area. The Carollers stood apart, their crimson cloaks bright against the snow, their expressions a mix of amazement and something less easily described. She imagined voices, harmony, and discord, and secrets sung in silence. Raymond, she added as her nephew joined her. I believe this Christmas will be rather more eventful than we had planned. He scowled, looking at Henry's body, which was now covered in a blanket. Don't you think? Aunt Jane, surely this is just a tragedy. She straightened her shawl, her eyes glistening in the lantern light. Tragedies, my love, are rarely so easy, and I believe this one has only begun to sing. Chapter 2. A Silent Note. The morning after Henry Voss's death, St. Mary Me awoke to a cloudy sky, as if the hamlet was mourning under a gray shroud. Miss Marple sat in the vicarage, having tea with Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, whose frantic speech filled the room like a wild wind. The vicarage parlor was warm, with a fire burning in the fireplace, but the air had a chill that no flame could remove. It's dreadful, Miss Marple, Mrs. Clement remarked, gripping her handkerchief. Henry, of all people, has such a beautiful voice and is so essential. The Carollers will not be the same without him. Miss Marple's needles clicked slowly, her eyes gentle yet attentive. She said, a fine voice indeed. And yet, it's the silences between notes that often tell the story, don't you think? Mrs. Clement blinked, unsure how to answer, but Miss Marple's gaze had already turned to the window. Outside, the peasants huddled in knots, their voices drifting like snowflakes. Constable Reed had walled off the area, and Dr. Haddock's statement that Henry's death was not natural had spread as quickly as the morning frost. Miss Marple excused herself and made her way to the village hall, where the Carollers were meeting to plan their next performance. The hall smelt like polished wood and damp wool, and its walls were decorated with garlands that now seemed out of place. The Carollers sat in a loose circle, their expressions a mix of grief, discomfort, and something harsher. Clara Beaumont, the singer, presided at the center, her scarf draping dramatically over one shoulder. We must carry on, she stated, her voice full of passion. Henry would have liked us to sing. It's our responsibility to the village. Mr. Reginald Thorne, the choir director, stood by the window, arms folded. Clara, duty or not, we're a tenor short, and with the police sniffing about, now isn't the time for rehearsals. His tone was harsh, and his gaze avoided the gathering. Miss Marple sank into a chair at the edge of the circle, her presence scarcely discernible amidst the strain. She observed the Carollers, including young Tom Harrow, the bassist, whose hands fidgeted on his lap. Edith Grayson, the alto, whose tight-lipped silence said louder than words, and Peter Leal, the baritone, who fixed his eyes on Clara for too long. Each face, she imagined, represented a verse in a song she had yet to comprehend. Henry would not like us to stop. Tom ventured, his tone apprehensive. He adored the carols. They were said to be at the heart of Christmas. Heart of Christmas. Edith snapped, her eyes flaming. Tom, Henry liked being in the spotlight. Don't make him a saint now that he's gone. Her comments resonated throughout the room. Clara gasped and clutched her scarf, as if wounded. Edith, that's uncalled for, Peter remarked, his tone stern but his gaze soft on Clara. We are all upset. There's no need to bring up past grudges. Miss Marple's needles paused for a time. Old grudges, she explained. How very interesting. Mr. Thorne turned away from the window, his face a mask of control. Enough. The cops will need statements from all of us. Until then, we will postpone rehearsals. No arguments. His eyes shifted to Clara, who appeared to be about to argue but chose to remain silent. Miss Marple stayed as the group dispersed, her gaze drawn to a crumpled piece of paper beside Clara's chair. Sheet music fragment with singed edges. She slid it into her handbag, her actions as subtle as a shadow. Outside, snow had started falling again, softening the village's borders, but not its secrets. Miss Marple, Clara said, stopping her at the door. Her grin was dazzling, but her gaze was watchful. Are you Raymond's aunt? What a bummer about Henry. I hope that does not spoil your Christmas." Miss Marple returned the smile, her eyes kind yet piercing. "Oh, my darling, Christmas has a way of exposing what is concealed. And I've always found the truth to be a very satisfying gift." Clarara's smile faltered for a moment before she dashed into the snow. Miss Marple watched her leave. Her mind was already stitching together the threads of discord she'd seen, the stares, the silences, and the singed paper in her purse. She suspected that Henry's death was not an isolated incident. It was a chorus, and she wanted to find the voice that sung out of tune. The third chapter is on historical voices. By lunchtime, the snow had accumulated, shrouding St. Mary's in solitude, broken only by the crunch of boots and the distant toll of the church bell. Miss Marple strode down the high street, her cloak snug against the cold and her eyes sparkling with determination. The village was alive with rumors of Henry Voss's death. But Miss Marple sought facts, not rumors, and the facts she knew were frequently buried in the recollections of those who watched from the sidelines. She paused at Mrs. Price's tea store, where the windows were fogged with warmth. Inside, the air reeked of scones and secrets, and Mrs. Price, a woman with a memory as sharp as her tongue, was wiping the counter. "Miss Marple," she said, her eyes narrowing in inquiry. "Come to mourn Henry Voss, or to sniff out what killed him?" Miss Marple smiled and sat at a corner table. "A cup of your excellent tea, Mrs. Price, and perhaps a chat. Henry was an important guy, wasn't he? I believe you knew him well." Mrs. Price snorted and poured tea with a practiced hand. "Yes, prominent, but not always well-liked. He had a way of captivating people before leaving them feeling hurt. Like a bee, he was pleasant until you went too close." Miss Marple sipped her tea with a gentle face. "A bee, you say? Has he stung anyone in particular?" Price leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Years ago. Oh, it must be 20 years now. Henry was embroiled in a real scandal. Margaret, Edith Grayson's sister, has proposed to her. He was a beautiful girl, but frail. He abruptly ended it. Margaret, on the other hand, committed suicide shortly thereafter. Edith never forgave him. She carries the grudge like a book." Then Marple's needles in her purse appeared to click in her thoughts. "How tragic," she whispered. "Does Edith still sing with the Carollers?" "With Henry," Mrs. Price spoke, her eyes shining. "Those rehearsals were as tense as walking a tightrope. Clara Beaumont didn't help matters by constantly lusting after Henry, despite the fact that he never gave her a chance. Jealousy is a bad thing, Miss Marple." The bell above the door rang, and Mrs. Price straightened up, her gossip cut short. Miss Marple thanked her and strolled back into the cold, her thoughts racing over the story. Margaret's death, Edith's resentment, Clara's unrequited love are all threads in a tapestry, but no pattern has yet emerged. Her next destination was the post office, where the postmaster, Mr. Dobbs, was sorting mail with arthritic fingers. He'd known Henry since they were boys, and Miss Marple found him ready to talk, his voice tinted with nostalgia. Henry was a dreamer, Mr. Dobbs added, peering over his spectacles, always talking about leaving St. Mary's and making it big in London. Never did, though. I stayed, sung, and created enemies instead. At one time, they owed money to half of the hamlet, including Reginald Thorne, but they worked it out. Miss Marple tilted her head. "Mr. Thorne is the choir director, Mr. Dobbs nodded. "I, Henry, borrowed a substantial sum of money several years ago. Something concerning a commercial operation. As far as I know, they never paid it all back. Thorne is not one to forget a debt." Miss Marple paused as she left the post office, near the village square, where the snow had been cleared from the spot where Henry fell. She remembered the burnt sheet music in her luggage, as well as the almond-like odor emanating from Henry's body. And now there are echoes of his past, broken engagements, unpaid debts, and unresolved resentments. The carollers, she reflected, were more than just a choir. Each voice carried a note of treachery. She looked at the church, where the carollers were scheduled to meet again tomorrow. A scandal never truly dies, she said gently to herself, her breath clouding the air. It is only waiting for the appropriate music to bring it back. Miss Marple straightened her shawl and returned home, her thoughts already sorting through the voices of the past, looking for the one that had quieted Henry Voss permanently. Chapter 4. The Choir's Secrets. The St. Mary's Church Hall gleamed with candlelight, its stone walls wrapped in holly and ivy, lending a festive atmosphere to the carollers' rehearsal. However, as Miss Marple slipped onto a pew in the rear, her knitting in her lap, she detected a dissonance beneath the surface, like a misplaced note in a familiar tune. The carollers remained in their normal arrangement, but Henry Voss' absence created a void that no harmony could fill. Mr. Reginald Thorne tapped his baton on a music stand, his expression serious. "We'll try Silent Night," he remarked with a tight voice. "Tom, you'll take the tenor line for now. Clara, please use less flair. This is not Covent Garden." Clara Beaumont, wearing a scarlet coat, tossed her head. "I sing as the music dictates. Reginald Henry always stated that my voice carried the choir." Her smile was pleasant, but her eyes presented a difficulty. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as her gaze moved from face to face. Tom Harrow, the bassist, shuffled uncomfortably, his deep voice straining to reach the tenor's upper notes. Edith Grayson, the alto, stood straight, her lips barely moving as she sang, her eyes coldly focused on Clara. Peter Leal, the baritone, sang with a preoccupied expression, his gaze drawn to Clara's profile. The hymn began with a beautiful and wistful tune, but the harmony was awry, weak without Henry's generous tenor. Miss Marple saw that Clara's voice dominated, almost purposely overpowering the others as if asserting a claim. Thorne sighed when the song ended, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Disgraceful," he mumbled. "Henry's barely chilly, and we sound like amateurs. Clara, you are drowning everyone out." Clara's cheekbones reddened. "Perhaps if the rest matched my commitment, we could sound better." Henry realized this. "Henry is dead." Edith snapped, her voice echoing throughout the hall. "Clara, you would do well to cease longing for him. It's unsightly." A tense hush ensued. Peter walked forward with his hand up. "We are all grieving now, Edith. Let us not grieve." Edith's laughter was harsh. "Some of us are simply happy to be free of him." "Don't pretend you weren't jealous, Peter, as you watched him seduce Clara at each rehearsal." Thorne clapped his hands before Peter had a chance to respond. "Enough. We are here to sing, not squabble. After 5 minutes, we'll try again." Miss Marple remained sitting as the carollers dispersed, her gaze fixed on Clara, who stood at the music stand, adjusting her scarf with careful grace. Miss Marple approached, smiling gently. "Miss Beaumont, you have an amazing voice. It must be comforting to lead the choir during such a terrible time." Clara's eyes softened, although there was a hint of fatigue. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It is a burden, but I do it for the village. Henry always called me the choir's heart." "Did he?" Miss Marple's tone was moderate. "He must have appreciated your devotion. I observed you had dropped something at the village hall yesterday. A sheet of music, perhaps." Clara's hand froze on her scarf, and her smile tightened. "Sheet music? Oh, I usually misplace things. Nothing significant, I'm sure." Miss Marple nodded as if pleased. But her mind recorded the reaction. Clara's voice had a little tremble, and her eyes darted to the sides. She excused herself and strolled outdoors, where the snow drifted softly behind curtains. The singed sheet music lay folded in her backpack, its notes a cipher she hadn't cracked yet. As she walked back to Raymond's cottage, Miss Marple reflected on the rehearsal, the squabbling, the stares, the weight of unspoken truths. Clara's desire was evident, but so were Edith's bitterness and Peter's silent hatred. Thorn, she remarked, conducted more than music. He controlled tempers, secrets, and possibly even guilt. The choir sings, she mumbled, her breath clouding in the cold, but not all the voices are in sync. And one, I believe, has sung a highly dangerous note. Chapter 5, A Frosty Trail. The town square in St. Mary gleamed, under a fresh covering of snow, the cobblestones gleaming like a stage set for secrets. Miss Marple stood under the ancient oak where Henry Vose had fallen. Her gloved hand traced the edge of the singed sheet music she had discovered in the town hall. The crumpled and burnt paper in one corner carried the notes. "Oh, come all the faithful." The carol was sung on the night Henry died. Miss Marple saw it as more than a coincidence. It was a thread in a web of deception. She proceeded to the home of Mr. Reginald Thorn, the carol's director, whose cottage nestled on the outskirts of the village, its windows dark, despite the midday hour. The air was frosty, and Miss Marple's breath curled like a question mark when she knocked. The door creaked open, showing Thorn, his face pallid and his eyes clouded as if he had not slept. "Miss Marple," he replied, his tone courteous but strained. "For what do I owe the visit?" "I'm very busy preparing for whatever remains of our Christmas shows." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes soft but unwavering. "Mr. Thorn, I won't keep you long. I was hoping to talk about the carolers' music. You select the parts yourself, don't you?" Thorn motioned her inside the parlor, which was crowded with sheet music and half-burned candles. The faint odor of smoke persisted, and Miss Marple's attention shifted to the fireplace, where ashes gleamed dimly. "I do," he replied, sitting stiffly. "Maintains the choir disciplined. Henry, of course, had his ideas, but I had the final word." Miss Marple sat down in a chair, her knitting bag beside her, and added, "I hear Henry was quite opinionated. I found a piece of sheet music in the town hall. 'Oh, come all ye faithful,' partially scorched. Curious, don't you, for such a beloved carol?" Thorn's hand twitched, knocking a pencil to the floor. He stooped to get it, hiding his face for a second. "You claim to have been burned?" "Probably someone's carelessness. Clara is constantly leaving papers around, as does Tom, who is clumsy." "Perhaps," Miss Marple answered, her tone light, "though it was near the square where Henry died, and I recall you being very specific about that carol during rehearsal. You insisted on a precise configuration, right?" Thorn's gaze furrowed, but he faked a grin. "Miss Marple, you have a sharp memory." "Yes, I rearranged it to match our voices." Henry's tenor was challenging, but I don't see how this relates to anything. Miss Marple's needles clicked faintly while her hands remained still. "Oh, just an elderly woman's interest. I also heard Henry owed you money, a debt from many years ago. That must have been difficult, especially for a man as exact as you." Thorn stood swiftly, his chair scrapping across the floor. "That is old history. Henry and I settled our disputes. If you think I had anything to do with his death, you're mistaken." His speech was sharp, yet his hands trembled, revealing a lapse in his composure. Miss Marple rose, her look placid, saying, "Oh dear me, no. I just wanted to know if you'd observed anything peculiar that night. You were really close to Henry when he collapsed." Thorn's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he escorted her to the civilian and the door. Miss Marple looked back as she stepped into the snow, noticing the twitching curtain in Thorn's window. She slid the sheet music deeper into her purse, her thoughts turning to the talk, the singed paper, the almond-like smell, and the Thorn's uneasiness. They were notes from a melody she was starting to hear. As she walked toward the village, the church bells rang, reminding her of the carolera's upcoming rehearsal. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "A conductor leads the choir," she said softly. "But who leads the conductor? And what tune do they play when no one is listening?" Chapter 6, Whispers in the Snow. The snow fell in soft, persistent flakes, drowning out the voices of St. Mary and me as dusk fell over the village. Miss Marple sat by the fire in Raymond's cottage, her knitting needles idle for once, her gaze concentrated on a small, crumpled note she had discovered slid under the door that morning. The words, written in a hurried hand, were harsh. "Leave behind the careless. Be, O lady, or you'll sing your final note." She glanced over the paper, noticing the poor stationery and a thin smudge of ink. She wondered how fear might cause even the most intelligent people to be reckless. She tucked the note into her bag next to the singed sheet music and decided to go to the village hall, where Constable Reed was gathering statements from the Carollers concerning Henry Vaux's death. The hall was a hive of nervous energy, and the air was heavy with the aroma of damp clothes and pine from a nearby Christmas tree. Constable Reed, a young man with more energy than technique, stood beside a table, taking notes while the Carollers recounted their actions. Miss Marple glided into a chair near the rear, her presence unnoticeable as a shadow, her ears alert to every word. Clara Beaumont spoke first, her voice clear and firm. "I was, of course, singing alongside Henry. I hadn't seen anything unusual until he fell." She dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief. However, Miss Marple noticed that there were no tears. "You say you're beside him?" Constable Reed inquired, frowning. "You didn't see him drink anything or anyone hand him something?" Clara shook her head as her curls bounced. "No, nothing." We were all concentrated on the carol. It was so sudden. Her gaze went to the other Carollers, pausing on Edith Grayson, who sat with her arms crossed, her expression a mask of disdain. Edith's chance was next. Her tone was clipped. I was 2 spots to Henry's left. I only observed his typical dramatics. If you ask me, he brought this upon himself. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Edith's alibi was exact, but her bitterness was dissonant. Jija recalled Mrs. Price's story about Edith's sister Margaret and wondered how deep the damage was. Peter Leal, the baritone, was pacing, his hands fidgeting. I was behind Henry. I believe it was dark and the lanterns were dim. I heard him choke and then he was down. I wasn't sure what to do. His gaze shifted to Clara, who looked aside, her lips pursed. Tom Harrow, the bass, mumbled his statement, claiming to be at the fringe of the gathering, too far away to observe anything. But Miss Marple detected a pause in his speech. A peek toward Mr. Thorne, who was standing by the window with his back to the room. Thorne spoke with careful phrases. I was conducting and facing the choir. Henry was all right until the final note. I saw no one near him or interfering with his bat, but his fingers grasped it tightly, and Miss Marple noticed a tiny tremor. As the Carollers scattered, Miss Marple approached Constable Reed, her smile inviting. "A thorough job, Constable. May I ask if you checked the lanterns?" "The ones the Carollers carried that night." Reed blinked, taken off surprise. "Lanterns?" "Well, they're kept in the church shed." I didn't think to look. Why? "Oh, only a thought," Miss Marple added gently. "Light can disclose so much, don't you think?" She exited the hall, her thoughts sorting through the alibis. Clara's assurance, Edith's wrath, Peter's anxiety, Tom's trepidation, Thorne's command. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the edges hadn't yet aligned. She felt that the anonymous note was written by someone in the room who was afraid of her queries. Outside, the snow murmured its own secrets. Miss Marple paused near the church shed, where the Carolera's lanterns were stored. The door was unlocked, and inside she discovered the lanterns neatly piled, with the exception of one, whose glass was stained with a thin, oily residue. She moved in closer, catching a whiff of the same almond-like scent she'd observed on Henry's body. She mumbled, a lantern to light the way or hide a darker purpose. As she stepped back into the snow, the church bells tolled a melancholy reminder of the Carollers' next gathering. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her mind bright with ideas. The note was intended to silence her, but it had only strengthened her resolve. Someone in St. Mary's was singing a hazardous song, and she was determined to hear it out, Chapter 7. The Tenor's Legacy. The frost clung to St. Mary's rooftops like exquisite lace, catching the early light as Miss Marple walked to the solicitor's office on the village's outskirts. The discovery of the oily residue on Carola's lantern, with its subtle almond-like aroma, had intensified her attention, but she had received additional information from Raymond's housekeeper, Mrs. Hart. Henry Voss had been far wealthy than his modest tenor's life indicated. Mrs. Hart whispered that a will was being read today, and Miss Marple was eager to uncover its secrets. Mr. Grayson, the town solicitor and Edith Grayson's distant cousin, gave her a weary nod. His office was a tight space filled with leather-bound ledgers, the air thick with the smell of ink and old paper. "Miss Marple," he remarked as he adjusted his spectacles, "I did not anticipate you. This is a private subject, as you realize." "Of course," Miss Marple replied, her grin as soft as a snowflake. "But Henry's death has troubled the community, and I thought you might be interested in learning more about his situation for your own peace of mind." Grayson hesitated and sighed, recognizing her insistence. "Very nicely, yet only in broad strokes. Henry Voss was surprisingly wealthy, thanks primarily to investments and a little bequest that he converted into a tidy sum. His will lists a few beneficiaries, but I can't reveal them just now. Not until the family is notified." "Family?" Miss Marple's eyes brightened. "I knew Henry was a bachelor." Grayson coughed and shuffled papers. "Distant relations, I mean, and weirdly enough, there's a provision for Carol's fund. Henry was generous in his own way." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already adding this thread to the pattern. A rich man, a will, and a choir fund. Motives were building up like snowdrifts. She thanked Grayson and stepped back into the cold, her thoughts returning to the Carollers. Who among them knew of Henry's fortune, and who stood to benefit? Her next trip was the town pub, the Blue Boar, where the bass player, Tom Harrow, frequently lingered after rehearsals. The bar was quiet, and the hearth shed a nice glow over the oak tables. Tom sat alone with a pint, his big shoulders slumped. Miss Marple approached her in a disarming manner. "Mr. Harrow," she replied, sitting across from him. "You seem disturbed." "I think Henry's death had a heavy impact on the choir." Tom's eyes flickered up, tired but soothed by her tone. It does. Henry was doing well. He was nice to me. You once lent me money when my farm was struggling. Never asked for it back." Miss Marple's needles, nestled in her bag, appeared to click in her thoughts. She remarked on his kindness. "I hear he was quite generous with Carol's fund. Did he ever talk about his plans for it?" Tom tightened his grasp on the glass. "Not exactly. They said it was for new music, costumes, and the like. Clara was always bugging him about it, requesting nicer robes. But Henry had grander plans. He wanted to take the choir to London and make us famous." His words drifted off, filled with regret. "London," Miss Marple mumbled. "An ambitious dream. Did Mr. Thorne approve?" Tom snorted. "Thorne? He despised the notion. Said it was ridiculous that we belonged in St. Mary's. They argued about it several times." Miss Marple's thoughts raced as she walked out of the pub. Henry's money, intentions for the choir, and conflicts with Thor. They painted an image of a guy whose generosity disguised his ambition, and whose death could have been beneficial. Someone's greed, the charred sheet music, the contaminated lantern, and the anonymous note all pointed to a meticulous scheme. But whose? She paused by the church where the Carollers were scheduled to practice that evening. A person moved through the shadows toward the shed. Clara Beaumont, her crimson cloak easily identifiable, slipped something into her pocket. Miss Marple's brows sharpened, but she made no attempt to follow. Instead, she adjusted her shawl, her thoughts bright with ideas. "Wealth sings an enticing tune," she said quietly, her breath clouding in the cold air. "However, it is the silences between the notes, the lies that expose the reality." Chapter 8. A Carol for the Dead. The evening sky over St. Mary's was a deep velvet, punctuated by stars and the soft glow of lanterns as carollers gathered in the village square. Despite Henry Voss's death, Mr. Thorne insisted on a performance, believing it would memorialize their fallen tenor while also lifting the village's spirits. Miss Marple stood at the fringe of the crowd, her shawl snugly wrapped against the biting cold, her gaze scanning the scarlet-clad singers. The anonymous note, the charred sheet music, and the contaminated lantern hung on her mind. But tonight, she felt the mystery would sing a fresh verse. The carollers began with Hawk, the herald angel, sing their voices rising in fragile harmony, Clara Beaumont's soprano soared. But Miss Marple noticed Tom Harrow's strain to fill Henry's tenor role and Edith Grayson's brittle edge. Peter Leal sang distractedly, his gaze strained to Clara, as Thorne conducted with a rigidity bordering on desperation. As the final notes faded, the audience applauded, their breath clouding in the cold air. The carollers proceeded to the first null, and for a brief time, the village appeared to exhale, enveloped in the warmth of tradition. Then Clara slipped in midair, her fingers reaching for her throat. A stifled cry from her lips, and she wavered, her lantern slipping from her hands. It slammed upon the cobblestones, the flame flickering but not extinguished. The crowd gasped, and Peter ran forward to catch Clara before she collapsed. "Clara, what's wrong?" he shouted, his voice filled with worry. Miss Marple pushed past the onlookers, her movements swift but composed. Dr. Hadouk was already by Clara's side, loosening her scarf. "She's breathing," he stated calmly but urgently. "However, she is in turmoil. Smell it, bitter like almonds." Miss Marple's eyes intensified as she remembered the perfume on Henry's body. She knelt beside the fallen lantern, her gloved fingertips caressing the glass. The greasy residue was present again, weak but distinct. "Constable Reed," she said softly, "please secure this lantern and the others." Clara, pale but recovering, was led to a bench and drank water from a flask. "I'm not sure what occurred," she said, her voice shaking. "It came on suddenly, like a fire in my throat." Thorne's face was ashen, and he grasped his baton like a lifeline. "This is madness," he mumbled. "First Henry, now Clara. We are cursed." Edith Grayson's lips curled into a thin smile that she quickly hid. "Cursed or careless?" she asked, her voice chilly. "Some of us should watch what we touch." Miss Marple's eyes shifted between them. Clara's false fragility, Thorne's impatience, Edith's venom, Peter's lingering concern, and Tom's uncomfortable stillness. The audience departed as Constable Reed directed, but Miss Marple lingered, her mind racing. 2 instances, both related to the lanterns, both defined by the almond-like fragrance. She suspected poison, but how and who would deliver it? She approached Clara with a kind tone. "Miss Beaumont, you are fortunate to be unharmed. Did you notice anything unusual about your lantern tonight, or possibly someone nearby throughout the performance?" Clara's eyes widened and then narrowed. "No, nothing. I was concentrated on singing." "Why are you asking?" Her fingers twisted her scarf, which Miss Marple observed with curiosity. As she walked back to Raymond's cottage, the snow crunched beneath her boots. Miss Marple sorted through the clues. The lanterns were the key, but their location was random, selected by Thorne prior to each performance. Someone had tampered with them, although it was unclear whether the intended target was Henry, Clara, or the choir itself. The anonymous note implied terror, but Clara's survival indicated either a botched effort or a warning. "The choir sings on," she muttered, her breath a gentle cloud in the night air. "But someone is altering the score. I need to find them before the final note." Chapter 9. The Secret Voice. The morning sun cast a soft glow over St. Mary's, filtering through Raymond's cottage's frosted windows. Miss Marple sat at the breakfast table, her tea unfinished, her thoughts repeating the carollers' performance from the night before. Clara Beaumont's collapse, the tainted lamp, and the almond-like scent. It all recalled Henry Vose's death, but a new element piqued her interest like a loose thread in her knitting. The harmony of "Oh, Come All the Faithful" on the night Henry died had been wrong, not just because of his failing note, but because another voice had been missing. She opened her backpack and placed the singed sheet music and anonymous message near her notebook. She knew the music was more than a clue. It was a map. "Oh, Come All the Loyal" had 4 parts: soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. However, in Henry's last moments, the alto line was feeble, if not completely vanished. Edith Grayson, the alto, claimed to be singing, but Miss Marple's memory, sharp as a needle, indicated otherwise. Miss Marple went to the church where the Carollers were having a low-key rehearsal, determined to put her theory to the test. The hallway was quiet. The celebratory garlands are now drooping. Like tired sentinels, Mr. Thorne waited at the music stand, his face drawn, while the Carollers took their positions with hesitant steps. As Miss Marple entered, Thorne spoke in a curt tone. "I hope you aren't come to further disrupt us. We are barely holding together as it is." "Oh, I wouldn't think of that," she said, her smile placid. "I only wish to hear your sweet voices again. Perhaps 'Oh, Come All the Faithful' for old time's sake." Thorne hesitated and then nodded. "All right, positions, everyone." The carol started. Miss Marple listened closely, her gaze fixed on Edith Grayson. The alto's voice was clear now, blending in with Clarara's soprano, Tom's bass, and Peter's baritone. But Miss Marple closed her eyes, recalling Henry's death. Edith's voice had been a ghost suddenly, hardly heard, as if she had taken a step back or stopped singing altogether. When the song concluded, Miss Marple approached Edith, who was quickly gathering her sheet music. "Miss Grayson," she softly whispered, "you have such a steady alto. I'm curious, though, if you recall the moment Henry collapsed." The harmony appeared incomplete. Edith's hands froze and her gaze narrowed. "Incomplete. I was singing, Miss Marple, like I always do." "You must be mistaken." Her voice was stern, but a flush spread up her neck. "Perhaps," Miss Marple suggested, her tone kind, "though I noted you were 2 spaces to Henry's left, near the lamps. It must have been tough to see him properly in the dark." Edith's lips stiffened. "I saw enough. He collapsed, and that was it. Why are you asking me this?" She looked away, but not before Miss Marple noticed the fear in her eyes. As the practice ended, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze drawn to the shed where the lanterns were housed. The greasy residue, the almond-like odor, and the missing alto note. They pointed to someone who had moved into the darkness and was messing with Henry's lantern as the choir sang. Edith's position. Her animosity toward Henry for her sister's death, along with her wavering alibi, made her an appealing candidate, but Miss Marple realized the pattern was not yet complete. She strolled outdoors, the snow soft on her boots, and paused by the square's oak tree. The anonymous note had cautioned her to stop, but it also conveyed desperation. Someone had noticed her closing in, and Edith, with her sharp tongue and keen emotions, was no longer simply another voice in the chorus. She struck a discordant note. Miss Marple muttered, her breath forming a tiny cloud in the cold. "And I am so close to learning the truth." Chapter 10. The Christmas Reckoning. The village hall in St. Mary was bright with Christmas happiness. Its rafters are draped with fairy lights, and the tables are loaded with mince pies and mulled wine. The villagers had come for the customary Christmas Eve feast, but there was an undercurrent of discomfort in the conversation, because Miss Marple had requested the Carollers' presence, and Constable Reed stood by the entrance, his notebook ready. Snow fell softly outside, framing the windows, but within there was a palpable sense of expectation. Miss Marple stood near the hearth, shawl wrapped over her shoulders, her eyes shining as she scanned the semicircle of Carollers. Clarara Beaumont, her scarlet cloak bright, sipped wine with a false smile. Edith Grayson sat rigidly, hands clutched tightly. Peter Lale fidgeted, his attention flitting to Clarara, While Tom Harrow looked at the floor, Mr. Reginald Thorne, with his baton tucked into his pocket, appeared to prefer another location. "Thank you all for indulging an old woman's whim," Miss Marple began, her voice quiet but forceful. "Christmas is a time for truth, and today we must confront the reality regarding Henry Voss's death and the attempt on Clara Beaumont's life." A murmur spread around the room. Clara exclaimed, her hand fluttering to her throat. "Attempt? You believe someone intended to harm me?" Miss Marple's grin was sweet yet firm. "Oh, absolutely, dear. The lanterns, you see, the one Henry held and yours, were contaminated with a toxin, most likely cyanide, which has that unique almond-like odor. But the poison wasn't intended for you, Clara. It was intended to silence someone who knew too much." She produced the singed sheet music and held it up. This was located near the square and as part of "Oh, Come All the Faithful." But this wasn't just a carol. It was a signal. The harmony wasn't right the night Henry died. The alto line was absent, although Edith Grayson claimed to be singing. Edith's cheeks paled, her words harsh. "I told you that I was singing. You cannot prove otherwise." "Maybe not," Miss Marple suggested. "But the lanterns tell a different story. They were assigned by Mr. Thorne, but someone messed with Henry's and then Clara's. I wondered why until I learned about Henry's fortune and will, which included a considerable sum for Carol's fund and a particular bequest to one of you." Thorne moved, his gaze sharpening. "What are you implying, Miss Marple?" "I have nothing to do with it." Miss Marple maintained a steady stare as she turned towards him. "Didn't you, Mr. Thorne? Henry owed you money, which you never forgot. He also intended to take the choir to London, a desire you resisted. His death assured that the fund remained in St. Mary's and under your supervision, as did the anonymous note advising me to cease. The ink matched the kind you use for your music notations." The room became still, the crackle of the fire overpowering. Thorne's face twisted, but Miss Marple persevered. "You tampered with Henry's light by utilizing cyanide from your garden shed. You're an amateur chemist, I hear, but Clara's incident was a mistake. You intended to target Tom, who suspected you after hearing your argument with Henry regarding the fund. Clara snatched his lantern by mistake." Tom jerked his head and raised his voice. "I did hear them." Thorne threatened. Henry warned he would regret crossing him. Thorne laughed with a hollow sound. "This is ludicrous. You have no proof. Just an old woman's fancies." Miss Marple delved into her bag and produced a little vial. "This was discovered in your shed, Mr. Thorne, hidden among your gardening supplies. Constable, Reed tried it. It is cyanide. And the singed sheet music. You torched your arrangement to hide your tracks, but you did not totally destroy it." Thorne's composure shattered, his baton sliding to the floor. "I just wanted what was mine," he mumbled. "Henry was going to wreck everything and squander the money on his silly aspirations. I did not mean for Clara to become constable." Reed stepped forward, his shackles glinting. "That is enough, Mr. Thorne. You'll join me." As Thorne was brought away, the Carollers were astonished, their expressions a mix of relief and terror. Clara's eyes overflowed with genuine tears. Edith's shoulders eased, and her grudge against Henry was no longer a noose. Tom and Peter exchanged weary glances, and the cloud of suspicion dissipated. Miss Marple adjusted her scarf with a placid face. "The truth, like a song, is best spoken openly," she murmured gently, as the villagers began to mumble, their Christmas restored. Albeit bitter, sweetly. Chapter 11. The final chorus Christmas morning came on St. Mary's with a peaceful glow. The snow-draped hamlet glowed under a soft yellow sky. Miss Marple sat in Raymond's parlor, her knitting needles clicking softly and a cup of tea steaming next to her. The events of the previous night's reckoning in the village hall hung in the air. But a fresh piece of the puzzle had emerged, promising to rewrite the song of Henry Voss's death. Raymond entered, his expression a mix of astonishment and curiosity. "Aunt Jane, the entire village is abuzz." Mr. Thorne's confession was stunning enough, but Constable Reed arrived earlier. He discovered something in Thor's cottage. A letter. He assumed you'd like to see it. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, but her expression remained serene. "You mentioned a letter. What a revelation. Please fetch it, Raymond." A frazzled policeman Reed gave a letter written in Thor's precise hand, addressed to Henry Voss, but never dispatched. Miss Marple delicately unfolded it, her gaze tracing the words while the fire blazed on the hearth. The letter exposed a fact that Thorne had hidden beneath his avarice. Henry had not only owed Thorne money, but he had also discovered a secret from his past. Years ago, Henry threatened to disclose a fraudulent scam involving choir finances unless Thorne had his London ambitions. So Miss Marple mumbled, it wasn't just the money or the choir's future. Thorne died to defend his reputation, to silence a man who wielded his disgrace like a baton. Raymond frowned and settled across from her. But why was there an attempt on Tom and Clarara's lantern? It doesn't add up, does it, Jane? Miss Marple's needles paused, and her smile was faint but knowing. Oh, it does, my dear. Thorne's plan was meticulous, but human nature is disorganized. He poisoned Henry's lamp to keep him from revealing the deception. But Tom, dear loyal Tom, overheard their argument and started asking questions. Thorne intended to silence him next, but Clarara accidentally grabbed Tom's lantern during the performance. A chance occurrence rather than a deliberate act. She set the letter down, her mind weaving the final threads. Thorne's motivation was structured like a hymn, with concealed harmonies. Yes, greed for the fund exists, but so does fear of ruin. The singed sheet music was his attempt to destroy evidence of his altered arrangement, which included a coded message to Henry about their agreement. When he saw me approaching, he sent an anonymous note out of panic. Raymond shook his head, amazed. You saw it all, Aunt Jane. The lanterns, the music, the voices. But what now? The corollars are in tatters. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window where children played in the snow, their laughter a soft counterpoint to the morning stillness. The corollars will sing again. Raymond Clarara will find her humility, Edith her peace, Tom and Peter their purpose. The choir is not the notes, but the singers who carry them. That evening the village gathered in the square. The ancient oak adorned with new lanterns, clean, untainted, their flames steady in the cold. The corollars minus Thorne stepped forward, their scarlet cloaks bright against the snow. Clarice, soprano the silent night, her voice pure, not for glory, but for healing. Edith's alto joined strong and clear, her grudge buried with the truth. Tom and Peter sang with quiet resolve, their harmony a promise of renewal. Miss Marple watched from the crowd, her shawl snug, her heart warmed by the music. The twist of Thorne's motive, his fear of a tarnished past, had closed the case. But the village's song would go on, sweeter for its scars. As the final note faded, she turned to Raymond, her eyes twinkling. A carol like life is made of light and shadow. And Saint Mary Me, I think, has found its light again. The snow fell gently, a benediction on the village, and Miss Marple walked home, her steps light, her mind already humming with the quiet joy of a Christmas well sung.